All right, everybody. I hope you were able to get a good lunch, and I appreciate you coming back for the second half of the workshop today. So we're going to start off with a discussion by Dr. Peter Elkin from the University of Buffalo. As a sort of a point of process, if you have questions at the end of the day, if you want to write them down, just drop them off at the desk here. If we don't get to them, we'll take them into consideration, and I'll share an email address sort of towards the end of the show today if you want to send comments electronically, particularly for people on the phone. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, very much for that introduction. As you said, my name is Peter Elkin. I'm a physician, practicing physician and researcher. I chair the Department of Biomedical Informatics at the University of Buffalo, and I've been working with unstructured data in combination with structured data for, I have to say, over 30 years now. So it was a pleasure to be asked to talk to people that I don't normally get a chance to talk to about this subject, which I think is very important and near and dear to my heart. And I hope during the time I have to talk to you that I will raise awareness and a little fear on what make you uncomfortable a little bit with what we do today for lots of reasons, and then show you at least how we presented one solution, but that some of the things that are in medicine and that have happened in medicine over the last, I would say it's 400 years, can help to people to understand how to incorporate unstructured and structured data. And we have some recent data to show you what the effect of that incorporation does to both the quality of the data and the outcomes that you can achieve in a real and meaningful way. Now, you're going to see a lot of slides here, and those slides are many more than I can really go into in detail, but I wanted to leave them with you so that if people had an interest, they could contact me. So if I go through a slide too fast for you, contact me later. My email is elkinp@buffalo.edu, and I'd love to hear from any of you. What are the sources of unstructured data in the world? Well, we have documents, and lots of documents, millions and millions of documents for everything we do, and I'll kind of get into what those volumes are. You have reports, lots of reports, and I guess I'm thinking from a health perspective, but I wanted to make it generic so that it would apply to anybody's agency. We have things that you wouldn't necessarily be considering, legends of figures in documents that have lots of good information, tabular data that has information that needs to be normalized within the tabular data that we have. And then even in your structured databases, often the field names are not standardized, and there needs to be normalization of those in order to understand the data properly, use it properly, and combine it with other data, so in terms of enrichment sets. Some data types are really only accessible from unstructured data. You can't find them in any structured data. Things that you know are important in the world of health, if you've been reading even the newspapers, are the social determinants of health. There is no coded information that tells you these, and there are not general surveys that always get done, and when they get done, they don't always get done in the same way. Signs and symptoms that patients have, how people are feeling, what drives them to the doctor. Physical exam findings, again, are not often in unstructured data in our current health system. Counseling that we do, we are more and more in the new value-based payment structures dealing with how to keep populations healthy. And that means that our job is not to just tell the patients to do the right thing, but it's to make sure that we've done it in such a way that they will do the right thing and that will lead to better outcomes for our patients. So we need to do this. Quality of life. I mean, we have measured the quality of healthcare by death rates for too long. The fact is that the purpose of life is not death, and yet we often measure death as the measurement of choice in our view of how well we're providing health. And yet we need to make wellness and quality of life more of a central determinant. Behavioral data. I mean, in this, we need behavioral data. We need behavioral data if we're going to change anything. You know, we spend twice as much money as any other country on health care, and we're 36th in mortality. Now, I broke my own rule with the death rates. but this doesn't jive, and a lot of it rests in this bullet point. And most of you are aware, if you've read the papers this year, that we have 4 million people in the United States that are addicted to narcotics. This is a serious and abiding problem, and you can't find out anything about street drug use from codified data. It just isn't there at all. And so we need to do more. We need to do more. And then we need to get opinions. We need to make sure that we're providing good service on top of, in every aspect of our lives, as well as good function. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from and why the data and examples I'm going to show you are important, and they matter for health, but they also are exemplars for other areas of data capture and use that I think are important to all of us. We have standards for how we put electronic records together, and these standards go from very detailed standards of how we set up data sets to how we create structures for workflows and data provenance and data quality monitoring. And these are implemented consistently 18% of the time across medicine. If you look at how often guidelines are followed clinically, they are followed, if you look at the oncology literature, about 18% of the time. This is not okay. We need to do better. We rate these things, and I think I'm quoting Bob Walker when I say that when Epic won the Best in Class award, he said it was the cream of the crop. And the idea is that we're nowhere near where we need to be with our current electronic health records. They need to improve, and they need to work with academia to get things from the lab translated into practice. So I'm going to give an example of some of our work. This work actually had served as some of the knowledge base that went into formulating value-based care for the country, as we published the first equality papers in the world that showed that you could monitor the quality of care that a doctor provides. And many of the data types that we're talking about were necessary for us to be able to do that. And we now can do it faster and better. And you can see that for something like 100,000 patients, we got 750 million codes out of their records. So it's really expands the amount of data that you can see by a considerable margin, something like 6,000 to 1. We have a detailed architecture that's a big data lake, so we use the data science in order to do this. But the most important thing I want you to know is that we really look at data quality very carefully. And data quality requires you accounting for missing data, duplicate data, time series events, things that could be erroneous data, misfiled data. But also, we do cross-validations. And if you don't have multiple data types, it's very hard to do cross-validation. Cross-validation does a lot for the process of data quality. Yes, we also do some of the same things the other speakers talked about. We look at timeliness of data. We know how often it's repeated. We know how often a fact is repeated. We know whether a fact that was given by an individual that is more likely to know truth than another individual based on their role and responsibility, and we take all of that into account as we measure quality of data. However, the most important thing we found in terms of percent effectiveness is cross-validation. The more ways that you can prove that the same fact is true, the more likely it is actually true. Let me scare you a little bit. So if you take ICD-9 codes, they are wrong 23 to 40% of the time if you look at the literature. 23 to 40% of the time. It turns out that, why would this be so? Well, it's orchestrated that way. So it turns out in electronic health records, every time you want to order a test, if you want to get paid for that test, you have to put a diagnosis. And you can't it won't get paid if you put that you're thinking about that diagnosis or you're ruling it in or ruling it out. You have to say they have the diagnosis in order to get it. So things get on the problem list all the time that aren't true at all, and they don't get removed because it's just busy practice. And it's not that people are negligent. It's just that everybody's very busy, and it's a lot to do. And yes, there is some reconciliation of problem lists, but it doesn't happen nearly often enough. I'm going to show you some real data in a minute. So we employed a technology called ontology. And the best way for me to have you understand ontology is that it's like Aristotle, a systematized way of naming things, but it adds to it an infrastructure that's computable. So we can actually use description logic to actually have formal definitions that are computable that can give us the hierarchies based on the definitions of the terms in the ontology. And what does that do for you? That tells you that everybody among you have different perspectives. But when you come to the problem, a same problem, you should be able to see that from your own perspective and still have consistent data. And this is where we get into trouble in many of our conventions. So I'm just using diabetes here as an example. This is a clinical view of diabetes where you talk about its effect on the heart, the pancreas, the liver, adipose tissue, but it's just as valid to talk about it from a biologic perspective, where we have the beta cell that makes the insulin and its molecular effects on each of the different molecular pathways that are affected by diabetes or that affect diabetes, including the, in type 1 diabetes, the antibodies against insulin or the beta cell. So in Buffalo, we had created, that's I think becoming an international standard now, the basic formal ontologies. Our upper level ontology and many scientific ontologies have been authored in this. And then we have the ontology of general medical sciences, which talks about the connection between that and health. So this is what it does for you. So I'm just going to show you quickly examples. So the idea is we have structured, unstructured data. We parse it into using high-throughput phenotyping natural language processing into structures that we have for it, and then we code the whole thing, and then we have audit tools. So this is a record. It's not a real piece of record. I dictated it like I would someone in my practice. And then we put it into a structured form, which is an XML structured form that's a national standard now that we use for exchanging medical documents. And then we code it completely. So all the things in blue are positive assertions, the things in red are negative assertions, and the things in green are uncertain assertions. So the first thing you have to know with unstructured data is the thing you're abstracting from the unstructured data true, false, or do you not know whether it's true or false? It's something you're considering as an idea. And if you can't actually differentiate those three, you shouldn't use it at all, because most of the things, at least we do in healthcare, we're working people up for them, and then we get to conclusions at the end. We use formal structures like this in order to store the data in graphs. And those graphs are associated with NoSQL databases in a big data lake. And that gets, for those of you who are technical, I'm watching, if you guys start falling asleep, I'll get less technical. So just nod your head down if you want me to stop doing that. But imagine that we have ontologies and we have a patient, two cases, right? Okay? And we have ontologically coded all their data. So now I have a basis of comparison where we have taken any utterance and we've reduced it to meaning. So we have a meaning for these events. Now I know a lot about that patient, and I have a basis of comparison for these two patients. Well, that basic activity is the basis for multi-center data sharing and exchange. And it starts, you need principles from the top for sure, but this is the bottom-up approach. It says that at the very lowest level, we need comparable data in order to build whatever structures and organizations that we make on top of it. So then you can take all your instance data and you can code it with ontology. And then we created a generic expert system shell that you can ask any question you want of it. And you can do it and get answers and change the paradigm for studies. We can even make little intelligent agents that run around this and find associations that we would have never, ever, ever thought to think about de novo. And this will get us to a change in healthcare, from a cottage industry to a systematized practice of care, where we go from these precision medicine initiatives and we move them through implementation science into a learning health system environment. And it should be a learning healthcare environment nationally. And we should all participate in that for the greater good of all of us, and to make sure that we can advance care and science as fast as possible for you, for your relatives, for your children, and all of us. So this is, I work at the VA in part, and this is their corporate data warehouse. And this is some of the genetic information that you can get from, like, the Million Vet Program and others that give you a sense of how we can get to precision medicine ideas. And for those who don't understand precision medicine, if you take evidence-based medicine and you make it more precise by the genetics that an individual is carrying and the pathways that are operant in their disease, that's what precision medicine is, so that you don't have to be scared by the term. We have the data center that's creating the genomic data commons submissions for the precision oncology and the Apollo program that you may have heard of from the government. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be working with people at Harvard to do that, and we're having a lot of fun. But the idea here is we take clinical data, image data, and genetic data, and we do secondary analytics so that we don't have it just in its native form, but we extract all the information into indices that are in the middle of this, because it takes a long time to do that extraction. And then once you do that, you can ask questions very quickly, and I'm going to show you some things. And this is the Precision Oncology Project and how we're hoping to make that a precision medicine initiative through an electronic tumor board to help individual cancer patients. Turns out that people who have a tumor board do better with cancer. And anybody in the audience had a friend or family that has had cancer ever? Anybody? Yeah. So it touches a lot of lives, you know. And we know that we can bring this technology and bring the opinions of more people to bear on everybody's case if we do it asynchronously. So we're building that, and it's going to be open and available. We have new ways to discover drugs, to translate cures into knowledge that's part of this. And you're imagining, why are we talking about this? Well, these are all different data types. It's not just, you have to think about primary data types, secondary data types, the difference in reliability with them, and how you would use each of these for different purposes based on your use cases. So this is 3D molecular modeling and then docking algorithms to test all of our known drugs against any particular target. So when Ebola came out, we did it for Ebola and found the first treatment for Ebola, published it. We can do this not in years, but in weeks, you know, to get the answers down to very quick. And if anybody wants to, and we validated in a dengue fever model. And this one is basically how we would put it together in a full experiment. So if you had, let's say, a cancer, let's say it's a liver cancer, you biopsy a piece of the liver that has cancer and a piece of the liver that doesn't, and you look at the genes that are up or down regulated across them. So these are two different data types, right? Then you take those and you measure them against all the metabolic, regulatory, and signaling pathways that we have in the biomedical literature. Then we can take the pathways that light up and get 3D molecular modeling for all of these and dock all the known drugs against them, get them right into phase 1 trials. And we think that that's going to speed our ability to bring cures to patients. And this is one of the guys in my department who does that. And the idea is that we're using this computational techniques to generate intermediate data that helps us to do this faster and faster. So as you know, we're paying doctors for value now, and we define that as quality over cost. Quality defined as outcome, safety, and service. We need reliability of those functions. Kaplan and Norton said in their famous book, The Balanced Scorecard, said, you can't manage what you can't measure what you can't describe, and that's where you need ontology to represent things in all fields. So the idea is we take people and technology and bring them together with process, which is not unfamiliar with you. So this is an interface that we call the BMI Investigator. Basically, you can type in anything you want. It's got all the unstructured plus structured data in our clinical environment, and you can go in and ask any research question. You can do it as complicated as you want. You get inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. You can save them individually, save them together. It's the population. Ask one or any one of questions, and you get your answer in seconds. So you can now start to do studies, whole studies in 5 minutes. Who doesn't have 5 minutes? We can make it more our culture of inquiry. You know how many times? You want to know how many times doctors think of questions on the rounds that never get answered? 2/3 of the questions that come up are never answered. 2/3. That's because it takes too much time to do it. And if we can make it faster, we can do something extraordinary. Then you can output the data and do more with it as you need to. So this was obviously something that's not coded. How many people have anxiety in our practice? We had 212,000 people. Out of that, 32,700 and some were anxious. If we look at who's anxious, we can see it by race, gender, ethnicity, gender. You can see that females report about almost twice as often anxiety. It doesn't mean that they are, but they're willing to share it. And then we have the age groups. And You guys know some of the reasons for the distribution, but we could go into it in detail. Here's one. You get an observation. Someone came into my office and said, I think patients who have rosacea, which is an autoimmune rash on the face, are more likely to have obstructive sleep apnea. 5 minutes, did the study, and the chance of rosacea without, the chance of obstructive sleep apnea without rosacea was 2.6%. With rosacea was 8.8%, very highly statistically significant. The number needed to test was only 12. That's a great test. I mean, if you get under 50, it's a good test, but 12 is outstanding. Every single person in the world who has rosacea should be asked questions about whether they have the signs and symptoms of obstructive sleep apnea. This is the kind of thing you can do immediately with unstructured data that you could not do. You couldn't even start thinking about that with structured data. We have a common EMR for all the EMRs that go into this observational database, and we can do studies off it. I'm just kidding. So our quality of care went way up, giving report cards to our doctors. We're now #1 in our network. We give them quality of care measures from all these. Now, if you ask how many of these things are in structured data, some are, not that many. So if I want to know how many people got a hemoglobin A1C, that's in structured data. If I want to know how many of them had a hemoglobin A1C of greater than 9, which is bad, or under 7, which is good, I can't tell that with structured data. I can only tell that with EMR data. So you have lab and medications and radiologic data and other kinds of data, as well as the clinical notes that are inaccessible. And so the outcomes are just not there. Oh, okay, so I'm going to go through, and we track it for the practice, and I apologize for all that. We've done stuff with the opioid epidemic, and scarily in our practice, 40% of our patients who have opioids on board have also benzodiazepines, which is a black box warning, and it's important for us to do something about. By the way, if you want good buffalo wings when you come to Buffalo, here are the places where you can get them. So I'm just going to tell you about this one study I just did. We presented at the American Heart Meeting, where we used an AI-based approach to natural language processing in order to help people with non-valvular AFib. They're at higher risk of stroke and death because of their this arrhythmia. It's the most common arrhythmia that people get. And the idea was that we could measure who had non-valvular atrial fibrillation. We could also measure the CHA2DS2-VASc score, which told us what their stroke risk was, and their HAS-BLED score, which said what is their bleeding risk if anticoagulated. And by the way, if you anticoagulate these people, you can get decreased to very small amounts their risk for stroke. So, because they don't have very much time, when I compared structured to unstructured data, it was highly significantly better. And we were able to find in finding non-valvular AFib, an additional 36.3% of patients that had true non-valvular AFib. You are missing in your structured data 36.3% of the true positive cases in whatever field you go in. This is just one example of this, but I'll tell you, it holds regularly. If you look at the skew in the literature in my 23 to 40% that I told you, it was 23 in some of the American papers. In Europe, it was 40, and I think they were more likely right. We got 36.3% error rate of missed cases. That's such a huge effect, it may invalidate a lot of the retrospective research that's been done. So you can see that the models for the structured plus unstructured data look a lot more like the gold standard, which was 2 human review with a third adjudicating where they differed. Go up. Clearly, even in getting the CHA2DS2-VASc and the HAS-BLED scores, it was better to use the structured plus unstructured data. If you look at the ROC curve, it was a better ROC curve in using the structured plus unstructured data in finding the CHA2DS2-VASc and the HAS-BLED scores. But if you look at what happens, if you take this as sort of the outcomes data, but I'm going to get to the facts. So we also looked at 63 million patients that came out of the Optum and Truden databases, so a fair sample of the country. This is actually a little less sick population, and these people, we looked at what the stroke rate was and what the death rate was for these people over that, and then we looked at the cost with adjusting for the inflation rate of taking care of these patients the year after a stroke versus the year before the stroke for the same person, and then adjusted for inflation, which was 1.9% that year. And what we found was the following, and this is sort of the impact slide, that if we implemented structured plus unstructured data, we could treat an additional 4 million people in the country that we would prevent 182,000 strokes a year, that we would save over 10,900 people's lives, and that we would save the country in the first year $18 billion. That's huge, right? That's huge. And you know, a stroke doesn't just affect the patient; it affects their entire family. So this is a huge advance, and we're very proud of it. And this is one disease. Let's say we did it for every disease, where we had surveillance around everything that every doctor did for every condition there was. How much safer would care be? How much could we save in the country, and how much could we change the feeling of our citizens in the U.S. about what they're going to get when they go to their doctor? You know, how safe it is to go to the doctor. So this is Publishing Med, and that was something else that I don't have to talk about here. And I'll just close with two quotes that are some of my favorite. So one is by Machiavelli in 1505, and he said, "There's nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. Because the innovator has for enemies all those who've done well under the old conditions, and only lukewarm defenders and those who may do well under the new." And that is actually just as true today as it was in 1505, 600 years ago. Amazing. But my favorite quote is, "The best way to predict the future is to create it," by Peter Drucker at Harvard. Please join us and help create the future. And I thank you for your kind attention.